So what I want to talk to you about today then is the result of some research projects here at the Institute for Transport Studies that have been done by the team that Professor Grant Muller has brought together, including myself and Gillian Harrison from the Institute for Transport Studies, Thomas Redfern, Nick Mallison, Colin Kane from Geography, and Rob Snowball from Newcastle City Council. So we had a practitioner kind of embedded in the research work that we were doing. And what I want to talk to you about is the cross-sectoral modelling work. So this was a set of huge research projects, but I want to focus just on the kind of cross-sectoral modelling work that we did as part of the Habits project. Sorry, I'm not really sure which screen to go to. I'm kind of, it's an embarrassment of riches here. So this was part of the Habits project, which actually used a lot of the data from the Empower project. So I'll kind of be talking about those two. So let's do a little bit of an explanation then. So we used existing transport, air quality and health databases. So we used the global disease burden database set up by the World Health Organization. 2016 one was the most recent one we were able to use. We used census data, so we used 2011 census data, but also the midterm estimates, the updates, the 2016 updates. So all the time we were trying to bring in the most recent data. We used Stats 19, which is a bit of a transport term, so that's the database of accidents, road traffic incidents. And we also used NO2 databases based on real-world observation that's been taken by the Urban Observatory. But what we brought in was this new generation data. So what we were able to bring in was mobile phone data collected via a mobile app as part of the Empower project. We then looked at a number of different models, tools, evaluation models and tools that are available. The integrated transport health model, NICE return on investment model, and the DEFRA model for pollution, for example. And we looked at all of these and decided on the one that we were going to use, which was the integrated transport and health model, in order to be able to model the impacts of transport, health, pollutants, exposure to pollutants, and the equity aspects of that as well. So I'll just go on to the case study that we used. So the eagle-eyed amongst you will realise that Newcastle is not the People's Republic of Newcastle in an island in the North Sea. Okay. It's actually here. There's a little bit of resizing that went wrong. So you're looking at me bewildered there. So the Newcastle case study that we used, Newcastle is an interesting area. It's got amongst the amongst the deprived populations, it's got a much lower expectation in terms of life by less than 12 years. So if you come from a deprived area in Newcastle, your lifespan is shortened by 12 years if you're a man, and 9 years if you're a woman. It's an area that is quite dependent on cars, but yet there's quite a lot of deprivation and quite a lot of households without cars. We worked with Newcastle City Council, and we also worked with the chief scientist, the chief medical scientist for Newcastle. Newcastle got involved with the Empower project, and as part of that, they instigated a policy called Go Smarter, which meant that they implemented a mobile app which was incentivising individuals to change their behaviour and to reduce their car use. Okay? So that mobile app was one that they downloaded. It worked in the background. It passively collected data on their movements, but it gave them something back. So it was able to give them back information about what they'd done and also to try and incentivise them to change their behaviour. So for us, that data meant that we were collecting your longitude and your latitude and a timestamp every 6 seconds. So quite a level of granularity, which meant that we were able to draw the routes of where you've been, which side of the road you were on, therefore which bus you might be waiting for. we were able to use the passive collection of data in order to be able to get the time and the date of travel. We were able to derive the origin and destination based on your dwell times, the mode based on your speed, based also on some infrastructure features. We were able to get the certain locations based on your patterns of movement. In addition, we asked people to give us their age and their gender. We didn't ask for any other socio-demographic information. And we were able to collect some information on what rewards, what points people actually took up and decided to go for. Yeah, took up and decided to go for is probably the right way of putting it. The data was collected July to December 2017. We talked a lot with Newcastle City Councils. We talked a lot with the data scientists there, with the practitioners who said they really needed this kind of data. The sorts of data that they were relying on was aggregate, gave them a snapshot, was often out of date, gave them a lot of information about the system, gave them a lot of information, as Caitlin said, about the box, little box, the metal box on wheels, but not the information that they really needed, which was the information about who was moving around, where they were going, what their trips were in terms of the multimodal, the multi-stage trips. It didn't give them information about what they were trying to do, about the activities that they were trying to do. So the sorts of data that we were able to collect meant that we had a much richer understanding. Now, I was a bit of a girly swat. So when I got the brief and it said, these are the questions you have to answer, I thought, I have to answer some questions. So I picked 3, the easiest ones to answer. So I've got 3 slides, which are probably redundant now based on the other presentations we've seen, so I do apologise. But I answered the question, what do new forms of data offer policymakers? Based on our experience, we've got some new forms of segmentation that we can do based on behaviour. We've not been able to do that before. The types of data we were collecting allows us to do that in a dynamic manner, yeah, as people are moving around rather than after the event. We also had a better understanding of why people were travelling in terms of inferring from the activities that they were doing. We had an improved appreciation of their travel choices in terms of its multimodality and its multiple trips, the dwelling times, so how long people were staying in places. The integration of system-level data with people data was something we gained an appreciation of, and also how people were organising together in order to share and move around. Let's move on a little bit then into the next part of the concept, the modelling concept. I said we looked at a number of different models. What we decided to use was the Integrated Transport Health Impact Model, which is the work of Woodcock et al. 2009. So we took that model, which has a baseline and a scenario. So what you're basically doing is you're looking at the difference between 1 and 2. It aggregates people by age and gender, and then it estimates the global burden of disease based on that, using the global burden of disease estimates from the World Health Organization. The outputs then, it gives you a combined health impact, injuries, exposure to particulate matter, and physical activity impacts on health. So you can see how it's important now for transport. So here we're looking at the health impacts of transport in terms of the physical activity, but also your exposure to the environment of pollution and road traffic incidents. So what this model uses, what we did with this model is we used our track and trace data, the data that we'd got from our mobile app. We updated it so that we had the global disease burden for the actual region of where people came from, so the northeast, as opposed to where the model had been developed, which was California. We used the socio-demographic data, population data from the census, and we also then were able, so the unit of analysis in here is the metabolic equivalent task hour. Yeah? Metabolic equivalent task hour of sitting in a car is very low, but travelling around, walking and cycling is very high. And we aggregated by summing up all the trips exposure over a week. So using that, you can calculate the relative risk of being in a car versus all the other things that you do. As I said, we used the Newcastle data. This is just an overview, actually, from Rob's Snowball. So we had 1,457 users, over 3 million trips, 2,000 incentives have been taken up, I think it was. And we took a sample of this data. So they've got the demographics there of the different types of users for the data. Not quite sure how I'm doing for time. 2 minutes, thank you. So in order to be able to process this and to look at this data and to see what the health impacts were in the modelling tool that we developed, we took a sample of it. And we took a sample of 260 users, all of their trips over an 8-week period. So we had to take a smaller sample because we wanted to make sure that they'd actually used it consistently for the full 8-week period so that we could compare the first 4 weeks with the second 4 weeks of their travel in order to have the baseline versus the scenario, i.e. they've been given incentives or some other kind of change in their behaviour. So it ended up with a smaller sample size of 260. There were some other restrictions that we put on who could be in the sample set. And from that, we were then able to look and see what their vehicle kilometres been over that 8-week period to see whether there was any change between the baseline and the scenario. And because we'd used the population data and the indices of multiple deprivation, we were then able to look to see if there's a difference between the deprived communities versus the non-deprived communities. So what we've shown you there is a little snapshot of those from the highest group, highest spatial area with the least deprivation. Does that make sense? So this is the least deprived area, and this is the most deprived area. We then looked at what the differences were in terms of the total met hours and the relative risk of disease. Again, comparing those who are the least deprived and those who are the most deprived. And finally, 1 minute, really? Finally, we then compared them all. So you have, these are the IMDs, these are the most deprived versus those who are the least deprived areas. Now, it is easy to see, yeah? What's the big glaring thing that you can see when you look at these? It's all you teachers out there, you're all sitting there going, she's teaching me, she's lecturing, stop doing that, I hate that. There's not a lot of difference, is there? That's the most glaring thing, yeah? So our big thing is, we've shown that you can do this. We've shown that you can see the equity impacts. We've shown that you can use this form of data in order to be able to look at the health impacts. What we need to do now is to go and do that with the full data set, the whole 3.8 million trips. What we've done, in addition to looking at that aspect of the health, which is related to the physical activity, is we've also done the pollution mapping. So this is based on a set of data that we got from the observatories in the region. So this is the exposure to NO2. So not only can we look at where you walk, how you walk around, we can look at what your exposure to pollution has been, and we can add that into your relative risk of burden, your relative risk. And we developed a visualization tool so that we can actually highlight those people who are actually using their Met hours, so they're very highly active, or we can look at people by modal trips, so we can look at people by age and gender. And I think I'm running out of time. Finally then, the illustration that I want to give you is just the level of detail that we've been able to bring together. So this is our map of IMDs, which we've used, the deprived areas. This is our map of where people go. Been able to bring that together with the pollution map, bring that together with the scheme that the City Council might be engaged in, so their scenario. And for this one, it was actually Streets for People, a £16 million project. And then at the top, we can bring that together with the data that we have on the road traffic incidents. And that's actually from Gosforth Road, which is in the actual scheme area that we looked at. And you have the outputs then, according to the IMDs. I'm going to end there. Thank you very much.